Greetings and welcome to today's webinar, Capturing the New Value Propositions of Privacy, Trust, and Security in IoT. I'm Christian Simcoe, Marketing Manager for Identity Management Solutions at GlobalSign. Before we get started, I just want to let everyone know that we are recording today's webinar, and we'll email a link to the recording after this webinar is complete. Our presenters today are Lanson LaChance, Vice President of Product Development at GlobalSign, and Madeline Smith, Vice President and Director of Strategic Initiatives at the Online Trust Alliance, or the OTA. While the phones are on mute, we do encourage questions, and we will answer your questions after today's presentation. To ask a question, please use the question field in the GoToWebinar toolbar, and we will answer your questions after today's presentation. During today's webinar, Madeline will share with you the work the OTA and its members have been doing on the Internet of Things Trust Framework that addresses global consumer concerns. The framework provides guidance for device manufacturers and developers to enhance the security, privacy, and sustainability of connected home devices, wearable fitness, and health technologies, and the data they collect. And Lanson will talk about best practices and implementation strategies for securing the IoT devices. He will also highlight key technology and discuss an IoT developer program that can help you get started today. So before I turn the presentation over to Madeline, I wanted to highlight a few IoT facts and challenges that will set the stage for today's webinar. While everyone knows that the IoT market is exploding and more devices are being connected, what you may not be fully aware of is the privacy and security concerns that IoT presents. And one of the great challenges is when and where to address those security concerns. The OTA's IoT Trust Framework is a great place to start. And Madeline Smith from the OTA is here with us today, and we'll talk about that trust framework. Welcome, Madeline.
Great. Thank you very much, Christian. I'm Madeline Smith, and I'm from the Online Trust Alliance, and I'm going to take a few minutes here to introduce people to OTA and what we try to achieve, and then I'll move into the framework. So going to the next slide. Who is OTA? In case anyone doesn't already know who we are the Online Trust Alliance, and our mission is to enhance online trust and empower users while promoting innovation and vitality of the Internet. So important goals with that are to educate businesses, also policymakers, stakeholders, and do this in a way that allows us to develop best practices and tools to enhance protection of user security, privacy, and identity. One of the most important parts of the OTA is that we are a collaborative public-private partnership, and we're going to get into a logo slide in a minute, and you'll see what I mean by that in terms of collaboration. And another important facet of who we are is that we are, in fact, a 501c3 tax-exempt charitable organization. And the reason that that is important is because as much as we work with and have a great deal of respect for industry trade organizations and other types of collaborative work, we think it makes OTA unique that we are speaking out separate from perhaps professional obligations of our membership, and we are supported in that detachment and in that ability to be independent. We are global and bring in both membership but also feedback worldwide. And we're supported by over 100 organizations that include all facets, and this is particularly important in our IoT work, facets including retailers, commercial websites, interactive marketers, product manufacturers, consumer advocacy organizations, and people who are every piece of the ecosystem, both on the technology side and the consumer communication side. So I mentioned collaboration. This slide is just to give you an idea of the types of other organizations, many of these governmental or nonprofit or business associations that we work very closely with, not to imply that every one of these is a supporting member directly of OTA. In fact, many of them are our colleagues in the nonprofit space as well. But we work with organizations who also have, similar or crossover areas of interest for us. And part of the purpose of this slide is to see the the breadth, and particularly some of these international organizations that you can see listed here. The next slide is our actual supporting members. So this is just a snapshot of the type of company that joins OTA, and when we say join, what we mean is providing donation support, because we are, as I said, a 501c3 charity. We rely completely on membership contribution. And right in the middle of the slide, I hope you'll notice the Global Sign logo, because we love our friends at Global Sign. And this is a cross-section of the kinds of companies who support OTA's work. So when we talk about the consumer Internet of Things, and I want to start with, from OTA's perspective, obviously, the whole point of the concept of Internet of Everything or Internet of Things is that it's everything. But OTA, as a starting place, felt that from a resource perspective, we couldn't literally focus on everything, so we kind of brought it down to, for our purposes and for the purposes of what I'm going to be talking about, a consumer-facing picture. So it's less the industrial systems that are interconnected and more things like consumer wearables or products one might have in their home, and then broadening out to the connected home. So just as a scope, I want everyone to kind of see that that's really where we're starting from. Certainly it could be expanded. One key consumer product that is not part of our current work, but obviously is something we're watching very closely for the future, is connected cars, because there seem to be several other organizations that are highly technical and focused on the challenges of connected cars, so I will not be covering that here. And another consumer-facing device that gets into a slightly different industry is actual medical devices. So things like insulin pumps is not actually an area that OTA's framework focuses on right today. But our perspective is the kinds of things that you're starting to see in this picture, the mobile apps, the fitness bands, entertainment devices that are interconnected into your home, connected home, home security, garage door openers, smart TVs, things like that. So the important thing about the ecosystem is that it is highly personal, dynamic, and it is a persistent collector of data, and in some cases transferring data, and we'll get back to that. It is relying on a combination of devices, apps, platforms, and cloud services, all of which, of course, are coming from a different starting place. So at the moment, we're all faced with the challenge of how to make them integrate and how to do so safely, or what OTA would call safely, which is security, privacy, and sustainability. They all have multiple data flows. All of that needs to be checked and monitored, and we all have to understand how that works together. Of course, multiple touch points. And in these touch points and different pieces, you have different companies and then, therefore, different disclosures or different consumer decision-making points throughout that, which becomes incredibly complicated. Sustainability, or the word, we're using the word sustainability here to mean life cycle or the viability of the product over time, and I'll get back to that topic in a second also. Currently, our industry, the world is facing a lack of defined standards because this is all new. It's not surprising that there are few standards at the moment. And there are lots of non-traditional market players, especially in some of these very small home devices. You might have invented the connected toaster, but if your company is primarily a toaster company and not primarily a digital company, those new players may not have thought of all of the security, privacy, and sustainability concerns that other corporations already embed in their work. So we're trying to get the message out about the importance of thinking these things through before you jump onto a connected device. As I said, multidimensional issues. I just want to blow out these thoughts a tiny bit more. The data security, and there are more than just the dots that are shown here. You have the user. There, in many cases, working with cloud service or certainly some kind of connected place where their data being data and technology is being stored and served. Typically, it's a mobile application situation. The devices themselves are connected and connected to each other, not just connected, for this one specific use. The various platforms and the various service providers, so that the actual channels that are keeping everything connected, those platforms themselves are part of this ecosystem that we're talking about. And the issues of data security, privacy, and I mentioned sustainability. When OTA says sustainability, and we really struggled with the right word there, we're not so much talking about ecology or keeping our planet green. We're talking about the life cycle issues of these products and services and the ability to support them, the ability to update them, the ability to fix and remediate breach challenges, things like that. So in the way that a website could be fixed, patched very quickly, it may not be such an easy thing to be able to do that when you have a series of connected apps and sites and devices all being run or housed by different entities. So that idea of being able to do that is a really serious consideration as something goes forward over time. And then the deep questions of data retention and ownership. These devices, as I said, they're just constantly collecting data for very, very good reasons and consumer useful reasons. But data stewardship becomes increasingly vivid on this. So we are concerned about these privacy, sustainability, security, and the data in use and also in transit or transmission and in storage at rest. So what have we done about this? Well, in January of 2015, this year, OTA launched a cross-industry working group with some specific goals. And our working group is drawn from those companies that you see as our membership. We have some other ways to get involved. We've reached out to academia and to international organizations. But the working group was put together to try to discuss and think about these challenges. So our goals were, originally, to provide guidance to manufacturers and developers, with the point being to reduce the attack surface, to reduce vulnerabilities and make people aware. We are committed to best practices and embracing privacy and security by design as opposed to bolt-on at the end. And I think that's a phrase you're going to hear again in this conversation, because I think everyone taking this very seriously realizes that that's so crucial. We are all about, OTA has always been all about providing positive affirmation and recognition to companies and products and retailers who embrace these and do these things. So I don't know if everyone on this call is familiar with one of OTA's big, well-known initiatives every year is our annual trust audit, and we release the annual honor roll. And that's what we mean by that. What we try to do is set a set of standards or a set of expectations, a set of best practices, and then we go out and try to see who's doing those things and try to shine a light on them. So that is always our point of view, is to be optimistic and to be recognizing great people doing great things, great companies doing great things. And that continues to be the goal here. It's not about finding out who's falling short. It's about finding out who's doing best. We want to provide retailers and commerce sites with information that can help them with their product merchandising and promotion decisions. And that's something we've already had some success with. I'll get to that in a second also. Where possible, we are always looking to apply existing standards. So OTA is not a standards organization. We certainly don't have the resources to be technical standards organizations. What we are trying to do is gather together best practices and promote and communicate those as a benefit and a resource for organizations to be smart and to do great things. So we are trying to pull existing standards wherever possible, every place we can find them, and pull them together. We are all about collaboration and sharing, and we are all about, one of the things we are about right this minute on this project, a working group goal, was to lead toward what are the considerations and roadblocks and challenges to really creating a true certification or seal program. I think you've perhaps heard in the press already that there is some momentum behind the idea of having ways to certify and seal trust in the Internet of Things, and there are a couple of different organizations who've come out publicly and said, yes, we're trying to do that. OTA definitely believes our framework is a foundation of that, and one of the things that makes our framework different on that is our approach, which we consider a three-pillared approach. So rather than just sealing for or certifying for security, we're just certifying for privacy. We want to build a framework that allows the basis for a seal program or a certification across all three: privacy, security, and sustainability. So what do I mean by those three things? Well, on the next slide, we have a couple of examples to give you an idea of how we broke it out. In security, that's actually, we think a relatively clear-cut thing for most people. We have just basic issues like passwords, encryption, making sure that vulnerabilities can be remediated, that updates and really all pieces are signed and verified. Just again, it's the best practices that people already recognize around best security. Privacy is an area that crosses over with security. At least from OTA's perspective, we believe that those two are intertwined and hand in glove. You really can't have security if you are not also keeping an eye on data privacy, because breaches in data privacy lead to breaches in security. So when we talk about privacy, we're talking about, first of all, disclosure to consumers and consumer consent. These are really key issues for OTA, and they permeate almost everything we do. But for the consumer to know what information is being collected, and we're required to consent to it or to be able to opt out of it, or to know that if they opt out, then they lose the following features, so perhaps that's not the best fit for them. All of those pieces of understanding consumers' right to their data, or to the right to understand what is being done with their data, and disclosing what that is. Also, the data sharing issue. So again, we may have a company that has perfectly reputable, fantastic data stewardship rules of its own, but if there are third parties or interconnectedness, as the whole Internet of Things is connected, if there are the next vendor and the next vendor and the third parties that do not have those same, then it opens up to risk and breach. And we just want to make sure that that loop, that all of the players understand, and it isn't just this company is great, but now I'm handing off to another company that isn't. Sustainability I already mentioned, but one of the key important things there is to understand what happens if something changes, and this is super important in connected home. So for example, if I have a connected home and it's my security system and my gate and my garage door opener, what happens if my internet goes out? Can I no longer open my garage? Obviously that would be a problem. So just raising some of these issues, I don't think manufacturers intend to have these problems, but some of these are just unintended consequences, or not realizing ahead of time what needs to be thought through. So just the ability for something that is connected to continue to function, or if it doesn't function, to disclose that it will stop functioning, to understand what will happen to the product over time, and it's not just a point in time. But further, the idea of platforms evolving and changing, and all of those items that are on the security side of this slide will evolve and change over time. So being able to address them, what if there is a new encryption protocol that's even better? How will we address that over time, especially for some of these long-term implementations of IoT like connected home, where it may be years. It's not just a Fitbit that next year you get a new one. The second piece here for sustainability is disclosing what a user could change, particularly if there were a handoff. And so again, this may be most relevant for connected home, but supposing I sell my house, now what happens to my data? How will I disable all of the embedded technology and turn it over to the new user and reset it? Or can I take any of it with me? Or how do I do that? Just the whole entire question of transferring things over time. And then finally, some kind of mechanism for, well, it's really a very similar thought, some kind of mechanism if I transfer ownership of my device, or as noted in the previous bullet point, if I lose it or something breaks. How do I handle my data stewardship over time? That's what sustainability is. So in the next 3 slides, I'm going to give you a very quick picture of what the framework physically looks like. I'm not going to read through each one of these. If you would like to see the framework, I will point you to where you can find it and you see the actual framework. But the framework is currently made up of 35 line item criteria. And this first page gives you a screenshot of the section called security. We broke it into, it seems like we should be doing it security, privacy, and sustainability, but it turns out that the line items actually make more sense if you think about what their purpose is. So this first one is security, and you can see as you read through it, it has data security, PII security, site security, server security, email security, all of the different pieces that the working group called out as being critical. And as you go down over to the right, you'll see an identification of whether they are most relevant for connected home or wearable tech. On another page, you'll see where some of that changes. And you'll see that some of them are dark circles and some of them are open circles. The open circle portion of this is what the working group put in the recommended side. The dark circle is the mandatory side, the minimum required to have. If we go to the next slide, the next category is actually about access and credentialing. So this is a whole series of line items that are relevant to things like if it's a user-oriented thing, a personal password, but if it's a machine-to-machine sort of a thing, it might be whatever the protocol is for recognizing credentialing. But there needs to be a series of best practices of how to do that safely. Again, it's connected home and wearable tech. And then finally, the last category is the one that's about data stewardship. So this one is privacy, transparency, and disclosure. And one of the keys here is that word disclosure, or the word also transparency, because one of the things that is a concern to OTA is that consumers may not realize when they're buying a connected device what data uses and data collections and features of that product are married to the connectedness of it. So it's not about, oh, you should never collect data, or oh, you should always collect data, or any kind of restriction about that. It's about disclosing what that is so that consumers understand when they're buying it. If I buy this TV instead of that TV, am I signing up for something with this TV that involves turning over a bunch of data, or involves some aspect of voice recognition, or some aspect of connectivity to an app, or something else? And I need to know that before I buy it. So a great deal of the privacy, transparency, and disclosure section has to do with that transparency and disclosure, and then good, smart data hygiene and data practices. And you'll see here's an example of one where that number 22, disclosing the functions that fail to function, may not be relevant for the wearables side. It's really more for the smart home. That's the idea of what will happen to my garage door if the connectivity goes out. Maybe less important for my fitness tracker. So that's the way our framework is set up. And the next question that people ask us is, so what are you doing next? So again, I mentioned that we started the working group in January. We've been working very hard on this framework. We are now at, we've done a couple of rounds of it actually. We published originally in August. We did a series, a period of public commentary. We received an enormous amount of commentary. We've reconsolidated the framework based on the commentary and the feedback that we got. And what you are seeing now, and if you go to our website, is what we're calling the last call version. So it's still possible to have input on it, but we're taking this version, this last call version that we're furiously working on, we're taking it to Washington, D.C. In a couple weeks. So on November 18th, we're going to be holding an IoT Trust Summit in Washington, D.C. At the end of my part of the presentation, you'll see that there's a link. If you would like to join us, we'd love to have you. But we're bringing that on November 18th. It's a Wednesday, so it's exactly 2 weeks from today. And we will be presenting and releasing this version of the framework, which we consider to be last call, and we'll be doing it in kind of a working group environment and discussing it. One of the things that we'll be doing in that meeting is further validation that it applies to most recent global issues. And obviously, I'm sure everyone on this call is aware of the recent concerns and swirling of information around safe harbor. So, you know, we just need to be sure that we're not in conflict with anything, or that we're addressing things as best as we can. And ultimately, trying to pursue first a voluntary code of conduct. We think that's the first step, and as I said, we are always trying to do public-private partnership, and we're trying to move always to support innovation. So our first step is always voluntary code of conduct, rather than going directly to trying to pressure legislators or anything like that. But what we want to do is make a very practical framework that companies and individuals can use as a checklist to really be smart about privacy, security, and sustainability as they develop Internet of Things solutions. We would like that to evolve to some ability to enforce it, or at least to measure and identify it. So in that idea of honor roll, to be able to say, these people are doing it, these people are not, and then ultimately have some kind of a seal program with that. And so that's where we are headed. We're constantly trying to collaborate with other organizations, and as I said, if you would like to give us feedback, we would love to have that. So on the next slide, you will see some links, and I realize you're watching it on your screen, so you can't click the links, but this information, these are the locations of different places that you can get to us. So the first one is everyone is welcome to see the framework. The framework is not private to OTA members. It's on our website. It's at the location, the otalliance.org, and you can actually download the framework. But the other thing, and the important thing on the top one there, is that you can submit feedback to us. So there is a place where there's a form, and you can send us anything you think about any of the line items that you'd like to speak to. The next thing you can do is you can actually join the OTA's IoT working group, and that is somewhat separate from, you can also join OTA as a supporting member. So those are kind of two separate things. The companies that are supporting members of ours, you're welcome to join any working group, but if you have a specific unique interest in the IoT working group work individually, we have a possibility of you being able to apply for that alone if that's better for you and your organization. So there's the link to that, and we have an application for that. We would love for you to come to Washington, D.C. on November 18th, and we have a registration link for that in our upcoming events section. And then finally, if there's anything I forgot to say or that you'd like to know more about OTA and IoT, please contact us or send me an email.
Well, great. Thank you, Madeline. We're now going to
very much.
We're now going to introduce Lance LaChance from GlobalSign to talk about best practices and implementation based on a lot of the things Madeline just talked about with the framework that's being developed.
Great. Thank you, Christian and Madeline. I'd like to kind of segue here into acknowledging some of the trends we see in the marketplace, in that privacy and security more and more are becoming real distinguishing factors in differentiating a product in a very crowded IoT space right now. And leveraging that is going to be critical for organizations to remain competitive as well as reduce their risks. So we'll take that as an assumption here going forward and look into the next step of actually how you can approach meeting some of these guidelines and frameworks like what the OTA is presenting here. And so what we'll outline is some general approaches here covering security by design, standing on the shoulders of giants and consuming existing success stories within the internet, and then looking at how the Internet of Everything or the Internet of Things is really evolving some of these approaches as well. So leading off, the first topic is a concept of security by design. And really, the concept of security by design is driven by the notion that changes are much cheaper to implement and enforce earlier in the design cycle. And proper information security is rarely ever bolt-on. And so really, you're benefiting your organization and your strategy by doing this upfront in the design lifecycle so that your costs and risks and competitive advantage is maintained once that product is taken to market. The real question, though, is how do you do this, and really what do you mean by security by design? So the how is definitely going to be different depending on the participants in the equation here. But really what you start to do is you look at the value components of your product and ecosystem. You try to identify where the assets are, whether it's a physical asset or a data asset or a financial asset in the ecosystem. And then you put on kind of your black hat and think like a hacker. Think about what the value of that data is, how it might be compromised, what it might be used for, and then look through the vectors that are potentially at risk so that that asset may be compromised. And with each of the assets or potential threat vectors, you need to assess a probability of the compromise as well as the magnitude, how impactful of a compromise was actually executed. And then once you have that profile completed, you have a pretty good idea of where the key components you need to secure in your product and ecosystem. And then you have the opportunity to evaluate what technological components, choices, protocols, standards, or components in the tech stack you're going to choose and select to implement security and privacy in each of those areas. The next level of choosing the right approach that we're recommending and talking about here is what I call standing on the shoulders of giants. And really what I'm getting at here is that, well, the Internet of Things is new and there's different components that will change your approach here. Really, this is still based around the internet. And so what this means is the internet as well as information security principles that are used within it have really matured over the past decade. And if you go through some of the details in the framework that Madeline has proposed, you'll see a lot of common themes and best practices embedded in there. And so I think the OTA has really executed this well and taken a lot of successes of the past and applied it into these new standards. And the other component of remembering that this is the internet is that the things and the devices and these new things are really just one component. We still have the users and the services that they're connecting to in the organizations. And all of that has really matured along with the internet over the past 10 years or so. And so to apply and capitalize on a lot of the success, there are solutions and standards existing today providing distributed trust and privacy and security. And while there may be some lack in standards in these specific use cases, there's a lot of applicable standards we can look to apply and model into these new Internet of Things ecosystems. And one of the solutions I'm going to dive into here is PKI. And PKI, for those who might not be familiar, is public key infrastructure. And it's based upon distribution of public and private keys and securely signing certificates and identities within a model. It's implemented in a range of different protocols. One of the most prevalent is TLS, and it embodies and enables a whole range of information security principles. And many of these principles, as we'll see, are directly related to core line items within the OTA's framework. So the first one we look at is authentication. And aligning really with the traditional information security principles, authentication in the sense of authenticating devices to services, services back to devices, users to services, and the whole range, and even device to device. These are all areas where PKI is a really strong solution. And as Gartner and other industry analysts like the IEEE have noted, PKI has been used to authenticate, billions or hundreds of thousands to billions of things in the current internet infrastructure right now. And so it's really a strong proof point towards interoperability as well as scale. And there's a lot of ways you can apply and leverage this towards the Internet of Things. The next role PKI can provide in the information security realm is encryption. And given the types of devices we see coming online and a lot of the concerns that the OTA is addressing, privacy is undoubtedly a major concern. And so encrypting the communications of data in transit as well as data at rest is really essential. And by applying PKI, you're going to enable some of these capabilities out of the box in how you achieve privacy in your solution. And so as Jonathan and Tyson from McAfee identify here, privacy really needs to be built in as a functional requirement from the beginning, and it's not really possible to do it adequately as a bolt-on after the fact. The third role we look to PKI to provide is data integrity. And so one scenario we might look at might not be directly related to OTA's framework currently, but along the lines of an insulin pump where it's relying on some sensor data from within the body to guide its behavior and how it controls the release of insulin into the bloodstream. And when we look and think into that scenario, it really highlights the importance of data integrity. Another area that we might look into there is the home scenario where you really want to be sure that your garage door opener is relying on a trusted source of data that it's not going to open for a spoofed data packet or anything along those lines. The other area where data integrity is really important is another component that the OTA framework has highlighted is the integrity of software updates that are being pushed to devices. And you can leverage technologies like code signing to enforce and enable secure updates in devices to be sure and certain that any code that they run and execute is a trusted entity. So those are some of the core traditional information security principles that PKI can afford within your ecosystem. Let's look at some of the new considerations that the Internet of Things or the Internet of Everything is driving and how this addresses here. The first and foremost that I think is at a lot of organization and individuals' minds is the size, scale, and scope that the Internet of Things brings to the Internet. That now we're talking about billions of devices by 2020, and depending on the numbers, those numbers, are definitely mind-boggling by current standards. And really, you need to look at technology's choices that are going to allow you to scale to those magnitudes. The other component that definitely drives and differentiates the Internet of Things is the diversity of devices and processing power that they may or may not have as they're connecting to the Internet. And so this is a constraint that's going to guide some of the technical choices. Your interoperability within these devices is going to be a really core analytical point as you make your solutions. And then leveraging off of both of those, we see much more complex trust models and relationships within Internet of Things ecosystems, where the diversity of devices is huge, the number of users are increasing, and the number of potential services you're integrating is really complicated as well. And it's important to think about how you're going to bootstrap trust and manage the trusted relationship between all of those entities and things and services within your ecosystem. And then we have the notion of time and life cycle across all of these devices and cloud services. And thinking about how you're going to provision devices, manage them once they're in operation, and then transition them to new ownership or deprecate them from service. And those are all very nuanced components that are going to be very specific to your business case and your product usage, but also will drive your technical choices in how you apply a solution like PKI into your environment. So in this vein, GlobalSign is really keen to leverage a really proven technology like PKI into the Internet of Things. And so in this light, we're investing, we have a new product portfolio in our high volume PKI infrastructure. And this is a new service and platform that's really designed with scale and flexibility in mind, that can meet the high volume needs of Internet of Everything. And so when we look at some of the attributes of the Internet of Things, the first and foremost two here are the volume and velocity of identities that need to be verified. And so this is potentially billions of certificates or identities or relying parties per ecosystem, which is orders of magnitude of traditional Internet scale. Then we look at the variety of devices as well as the usage and life cycle. And so to handle this, we recognize that there are flexible certificate needs, different trust models to support these different use cases. And then so being able to provide all of this at a very cost-effective and scalable business sense, in growing from a proof of concept to a small deployment to really a billions of things and identities, Internet of Things scale is really important here. So this next example here kind of breaks down a theoretical scenario with a cloud provider and an ecosystem of services and users, and you'll see some very close similarities to this diagram and one that Madeline showed prior in the presentation. But we'll start with the cloud provider who has a number of web services exposed, whether they're APIs or web portals. And we'll start with the things connecting to the web services in likely an API service standpoint, and the things connecting to the web services to either consume data, send data, or receive command and control signals. Then we definitely have the consumers in this scenario that are potentially accessing that web portal via a web browser, or potentially interfacing with the things directly or with the things via a mobile device. Then we have the business users who are accessing the administrator portal to administer the cloud services for the business. And then in a lot of scenarios, we will see partners or vendors or other third parties accessing either a web interface or integrating their business systems into the cloud provider's web services. And then there are potentially other third-party applications that are either consuming the web services for additional data analytics or allowing the consumer to use that data in a third-party application for some additional features or functionalities. So then within each one of these, we start looking at how the communications and the connection and the trust is maintained between those entities. And that trust model is going to be very distinct or different depending on the specifics of this use case, as well as the control or influence the cloud provider has over the entities that are connecting to it. So in the first case, we'll look at the things connecting to the web services. And in early Internet of Things use cases, we see that this is a very much a private trust model. And what I mean by a private trust model is that the cloud provider generally controls enrollment and controls that realm of things out in the ecosystem. As the Internet of Things does mature, we see that evolving into a more public trust model where there might be a more open enrollment of things, but in the initial scenarios, a private trust model is generally sufficient from what we've seen. But then we move into the consumer space where the consumers are connected to the web portal, and that's a much more open trust model where the consumers are a wider range of entities authenticating and integrating, and their devices connecting are going to be a bit more diverse. And so this is a public trust model, and a number of times the way you'll see this enabled is through SSL, which is a very popular use case of PKI. In the administrator portal, it could be a private trust scenario, but just as easily advocated as a public trust depending on the technology involved. And then in the vendor side, we would likely see a public trust model in there where the vendor ecosystem is a much more wider range, and the cloud provider isn't necessarily controlling all of that integration there. And similar with the third-party applications. And so the questions that an organization will need to look at is how are they going to manage the entities and identities within each one of these components? How are they going to leverage technologies like PKI? And if they are choosing PKI, how do they manage the scope and diversity of all of these entities in here? And so this is really where a provider like GlobalSign is able to come in and help manage some of these areas for a cloud provider and provide it at a software as a service model and be able to scale as that cloud provider's business model grows. So really, what's the answer to identity and security and privacy in the Internet of Everything? I think we've seen this theme through the presentation, but really we're advocating to implement these security and identity concepts from the outset so that you can have a private and secure implementation. And if you are going to choose technologies and work with service providers, make sure that service providers are able to and capable of maintaining security and oversight. In this sense, GlobalSign operates a web trusted accredited infrastructure for our PKI services, and so it offloads a lot of that risk and cost from an entity into a third party like GlobalSign. And really what we see as a winning path here is to leverage established standards, that the Internet of Things is really still the Internet. And so there's a lot of proven standards that have been tested and vetted to serve at a very high scale in serving authentication and authorization, encryption, and data integrity. And so you're best served to try to go with the existing solutions and proven solutions earlier than try to adapt something new that hasn't been proven yet. But we also recognize that each deployment has its own needs, and so the solutions that are chosen need to be flexible and able to handle these wide-ranging use cases we see. And in that light, I'd like to announce our GlobalSign IoT Developer Program to the audience here. And really what this is enabling you to build identity management and security and privacy into your IoT solution from a proof of concept stage and be able to grow into a development and a production stage within the same infrastructure, minimizing the capital expenditures required and shifting some of those into an operational expense that you can match with the revenues. And being able to handle a really optimistic and highly scaled scenario, which we hope everybody that's growing an IoT product and business can achieve here. But also being able to integrate this at a very flexible approach with modern integration tools like REST and JSON styled APIs. So if you do have any interest, please reach out to us after this presentation. I'd love to talk with anybody about their proof of concepts or their goals in the IoT space. So with that, I'll hand it over to Christian to wrap up.
All right, great. Well, in order to learn more about GlobalSign, you can connect with us on Twitter and LinkedIn, and also visit us on www.globalsign.com. We're now going to start taking your questions. Once again, if you do have a question, you can use the question field within the GoToWebinar toolbar to type in your question, and we'll get to it. We do have a few questions that have come in so far. The first one is looks like it could be guided towards both Madeline and Lanson. Madeline, I'll have you answer this one first with Lanson chiming in on it too. Looking at the framework, lots of good stuff. What if I don't know how to implement things within the framework, and who can I ask for help in the implementation process?
Well, thanks, Christian. That's a great question. Actually, that is something that OTA is hoping to be helpful with in general. We are in the process of putting together a guide companion, or sort of a companion guide with resources and perhaps a little bit more description that aligns with the framework. So as we move forward, that is still in development, but as we move forward, we hope to be able to share with people further detailed descriptions and advice and best practices, much more than would fit on the small line items you saw in the framework, and links to or directions to some of those resources that we ourselves have used as best practices, so that people have much more step-by-step guidance. We are not trying to be proscriptive with an exact course of action. We are trying to be broad with resources and definitions so that people know where to turn. But definitely one of the places to turn is the various tactical and strategic experts in different privacy and security industries.
Lance, we can help them out on the technology side.
Yeah, definitely. I think, as Madeline alluded, we would love to, engage with any proof of concept or early questions to help sort out where the technical hurdles are that, as Madeline mentioned, we're one part of the security and privacy solution. And so we're happy to work with any organization, and, any collaboration as well is really welcomed. And so there's a lot of expertise GlobalSign has built over the years in deploying PKI at scale, as well as identity and access management. And so helping organizations apply that into Internet of Things is really a great area and good discussion point to have.
All right, great. Thanks, Lanson. Thanks, Madeline. Looks like our next question is probably more geared towards Lanson on the technology side. You talked about PKI. What are some alternatives to PKI for securing IoT, and is PKI the best method?
Sure. Yeah, it is a good question, and obviously, as we've gone through, it's really going to depend. But there's a number of areas where PKI excels over alternatives, and some of the alternatives you might look at in PKI are things like symmetric keys or shared secrets or API keys to manage the identity and authentication of devices. And some of those might be good enough in certain scenarios, but ultimately a lot of those start falling over when you look at scale, when you look at more robust trust agility, and trust agility in the sense of having unique device identification components and having the ability to share trust in a broader ecosystem. Those are where some of the initial solutions like symmetric keys start falling over. And so by building in PKI from the beginning, you also have the ability to start leveraging some of the hardware trends we see as being really important in the IoT, like secure hardware and securing the private keys within those hardware components, and leveraging roots of trust within those hardware components are nicely aligned with PKI as well. And so for a future solution, PKI is really well shaped up.
Great. Thanks, Lanson. It looks like we have one more question. If you do have another question, please get it into the question field now. Looks like we did get one more that came in also. Madeline, this one's for you. How can I get involved with the OTA and also with the framework?
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you for asking. We want everyone's involvement as much as possible. That is what we're looking for. So the key levels are, if you would like to simply look at the framework, it is on our website under our IoT initiative. Our website is otalliance.org, and under the IoT initiative, you will find not only the framework itself, but also you can access all the public commentary we've received. So if you'd like to know what other people are commenting on, that's an area where you can get that. And you can submit your comments to us. So that is a way that a person can get involved or an organization can get involved, even totally aside from membership. Obviously, we would love to have people be members of OTA. We are big believers in the work we do, and that allows you to get involved at two different levels. You can get involved specifically in the IoT working group, and the application to do so is on that same section of our website under IoT. If you would like to become a supporting member of OTA overall, some of our other initiatives have to do with email integrity. We have a working group around that. We have a security SSL group that specializes in that. We have a privacy group that specializes in that. I'm actually one of the co-chairs of the IoT committee. I'm also chairing the advertising integrity, if anyone has an interest in that. So we have lots of different initiatives, and if you'd like to become a member, a supporting member, there is a whole section on the website about membership and who our members are and the process for that. And then finally, we would love for anyone to come to Washington, D.C. So in our events section, there's a link for registration and all the information about our events. We're having a membership meeting day on Tuesday the 17th. We're having our IoT Trust Summit on Wednesday the 18th. And the Trust Summit is open to anyone who would like to come, just following the registration link.
Great, thanks, Madeline. We did get one more question that came in. Would the true OTA certification for trust in IoT that Madeline spoke about be certification for the company or for individual developers, engineers, and designers?
Wow, that is a great question. We are still in process of envisioning what such a certification program would look like. So first of all, I will definitely take back that question as a thought, because that's a great way to think of it. Is it something that a person or an individual can get certified in, or is it something that an organization is trusted, or even is it something that a product itself receives a seal or a label? These are great questions, and the road ahead of exactly how a certification program would be put together will be one of the topics of the Trust Summit on Wednesday the 18th. But we are definitely looking into all versions of how that could work so that we can move toward that.
All right, great. Well, thanks, Madeline. It looks like that was our last question. And Madeline, I'd like to thank you for your participation today with us, and Lanson, the same. Once again, if anyone has any questions, Madeline has provided her information to contact the OTA, and also for GlobalSign, you're welcome to check us out on the website, and we'll be sending out this presentation, a recorded link within the next day or so, that everyone has that. Thank you for everyone attending today.